it's not happening like the UN is saying it's happening whatsoever at all.
What? We're talking about bombs and guns and shooting versus the sticks and stones.
Settler violence is not real.
This is the Israel Guys.
Welcome to the Israel Guys, where we believe that in a world of fake news, you should connect to the true and authentic stories of Israel. In one of our recent programs, we debunked the myth of the so-called settler violence that the United Nations and other world leaders have been talking about a lot lately. That does not mean that Israeli Jewish crime and violence never happens. And today we're going to talk about a particular incident that happened just down the hill from where we're sitting right now, and why it's super important for you to know the truth. First, guys, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit that notification bell. It's a new year, and we are coming to you straight from Israel's biblical heartland, and you do not want to miss any of our amazing free content coming straight from Israel every single week.
And guys, don't forget to download the app. We've got an incredible state-of-the-art app. Go download it right now, the Israel Guys, on any platform. Just download it, get connected to what's going on. Luke, we're going to talk about settler violence, and I'm going to kind of lay it in because I absolutely hate that term, and I see it popping up all over the place, and it's really an inaccurate term. It's really just not. It's not a true term to start with.
Well, I guess we want to define,
boil that down.
That settler violence, as we debunked several weeks ago, is not real, but violence, all over the world is real.
Well, what I want to say, Luke, is that people connect it to settler violence is like the Jewish form of what we tend to see in the news, Arab terrorism. Okay?
Right.
So they've equated these two as like, okay, this is that, okay, and this is the Jewish form of terrorism. Okay?
Can we mention the rain? Just, if you hear the rain,
Amazing.
it's a big blessing for Israel. So if you hear it a little bit in the background, sorry about that, but just think of the blessing coming down on Israel right now.
Luke, settler violence is just not it's not a correct term whatsoever. It's actually it's just civilian crime. There's what makes a settler a settler? Like, no, these are citizens of the state of Israel. So we call this, when you're a citizen, that's a civilian crime. That, guess what, Luke? These crimes, it's not a specific case of crimes. Like, if you're a thug, and you do bad things, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be dealt with by the law and order of your country. And guess what? I don't know if the world knows this, Luke, but Israel is like a law-abiding, rule-keeping country. They have laws, they have judges and courts, they have a whole system, and actually, Jews get thrown in jail when they do bad things. So I just wanted to lay that out. Okay, but on the other side, when we talk about Arab terrorism, that's a non-citizen typically that is attacking, is at war with. This is when there's no.
It's also happened by citizens.
Yeah,
like last summer with the war with Gaza, we had a lot of Arab attacks all over what we call Israel proper as well. But most of the terrorist attacks that you guys hear about in the news, when you hear about stabbings and shootings and bombings and rock throwings, is by non-citizens.
The enemies. It's literally the enemies of the state of Israel, that are attacking the nation. And so I want to make a very clear difference. What people call settler violence, that is totally false. It's called crime, done by civilians, and that is taken care of with the law system. Guess what? There's cops. They come and they arrest these people, and it's dealt with. Okay, on the other side, we've got a big situation going on. And the Arab terrorism side, okay, you're dealing with non-citizens that are at war with your country. That's what I want the world to understand. I just have to lay that framework out before we enter this discussion, because people don't realize that Arab terrorism can in no way equate to so-called settler violence. It's totally different. One is at war with the nation. The other one is within. And every country, I don't know if everybody else is like this, but I mean, I grew up in Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, and guess what? We had thugs there too, Luke. I mean, is there any country that doesn't have crooks?
Okay, I want to talk about
people?
What happened, okay? Because everybody's wondering, okay, what happened? If you haven't seen it, because it's definitely been in not just Israeli news, but international news as well. And we know a little bit about this, and we have a little bit of an inside scoop because it happened
right next door,
maybe a kilometer from where we're sitting right now. It's literally down the hill. Okay. Last Friday in the Arab village of Burin, and then the Israeli community of Givat Ronen, which is just below the Mountain Blessing, Har Bracha, where we're sitting, a group called Rabbis for Human Rights, which we also actually have a little bit of a personal connection with, and a group called the Harvest Coalition, which they're both left-wing. They call themselves human rights groups, and basically they just go around and side with the Palestinians and everything, right?
Right.
Harvest Coalition kind of encompasses like a lot of other organizations. So Rabbis for Human Rights, those are the ones that we know. Josh has a personal experience with one of them. They showed up at the Arab village of Burin, which is down below in the valley below us here, to help them plant trees last Friday. I just have to say, I forgot to put this in the notes. It's a little bit ironic that they were planting trees because they actually burned down almost 3,000 of the trees that we planted in almost the exact same spot last summer.
Right.
And you guys know about that. We had it on our channel. Our dogs were stolen. The trees were almost 3,000 trees were burnt. It was a massive fire. So they come out, same Arab village residents, and almost the exact same spot, and help them plant trees. Anyway,
Luke, why didn't that not make international news? I mean, something like this on the opposite side. I mean, identical situation basically happens, and I mean, this was pretty extreme, but situation that doesn't make any news.
Right.
It's like,
I guess the reason we pointed out is because the Arab residents do not care about planting trees, and they don't care about land. But they're spurred on by these left-wing activist groups, and they know that they can make international incidents out of it, so they come out and they help them. They plant these trees. Okay, Jewish residents from Givat Ronen came down the hill, showed up at the tree planting. So you got Jewish left-wing activists, Arab Palestinian residents of Burin, and then residents of Givat Ronen come down, and the Jewish, mostly youth, I would say they're probably all youth, threw stones, and we're going to show some videos. It's not good. It was one of the more violent incidents. They had clubs, heavy sticks, beating the activists and the Arabs with clubs, and they actually poured gas and torched a car. So end of story, was not a good situation, and some of the more violent attacks that we've ever seen happen here.
Luke, and I just want to say, we're like 100% about bringing a good light to Israel and all this. So why are we bringing this up? Because that's what we're doing. We're bringing a good light to Israel. You know what all the other people are doing? They're telling this story as though that it represents the settler movement. Well, and that could not even be even close to the truth.
Well, because if you're seeing this in the news, this is like the culmination of the United Nations reporting about the rise in the increase in settler violence in recent months. And Israel's internal security minister, who's a left-wing individual, reporting on the settler violence that's increasing, right? So when you're seeing this in international news, this is like, oh, it's all true. It's worse than we thought. That's not at all what's happening, and that's why we're going to break it down for you, okay? First of all, and by the way, we absolutely condemn, like we said, it's crime. It's violence. We condemn terrorism from the Arab side, violence, and we condemn violence and crime from the Jewish side, okay?
Hey, Luke, can I make one quick point here? The Jewish crime that we're talking about typically is done with sticks and stones, and I'm not saying that we condemn that. We condemn that. We talked about it a few weeks ago. Stones are lethal. Sticks are lethal. I mean, that's bad. But if you want to compare that to the typical terrorism that happens from an Arab side, you're talking about typically bullets and bombs. It's sticks or stones or bullets or bombs.
Or knives.
Oh, or knives. Like I'm saying, they're still, even if you want to try to make this the headline, there still is sticks and stones compared to, and we'll get to it at the end of the show, just what happened yesterday from the Arab side. The news is intentionally ignoring the Arab war. I want to just say it, the Arab war that's against Israel, and they're focusing on the internal conflict that's happening with a few thugs in Israel. That's literally what's happening.
We're going to give you a side-by-side comparison of typical incidents, just so you can see how crazy it is to actually, that there could be any kind of comparison. But first, so you know, here's the responses from Israel's members of Knesset, okay? Yeah. First, a couple of right-wing members of Knesset, Religious Affairs Minister Matan Kahana from the Amina party, the Prime Minister's party. On Twitter, he said, quote, "The violent rioters who carried out the severe attack must be dealt with decisively, and this behavior must be rooted out." And here's what was key about what he said, that he really nailed it. He said, quote, "These individuals will not tarnish an entire sector of pioneers who are the salt of the earth." And he's obviously he's talking about the settlers and the settler movement.
Luke, which equals 700,000 people.
These violent individuals must be dealt with, and this behavior must be rooted out because they do not represent
not at all
the settlers and the biblical heartland.
700,000 strong. You can't just take one incident, and this is what's happening in the international world. You can guarantee it, and all the news articles going out all over the place. They're branding the entire settlement of the land of Israel. 700,000 people living in Judea and Samaria.
Right.
That's atrocious.
Deputy Defense Minister Alon Schuster of the Blue and White Party, kind of center right, he called the assailants a, quote, or a threat to, quote, national security. And he said the IDF, the Shin Bet, the Israel Police, the State Prosecutor's Office will continue their efforts to stop the violent Israelis who are undermining state security, harming Israel's moral image, and ruining the good name of the Jewish settlement in Judea and Samaria. They have a good name. These are violent, minority, radical individuals. Okay, on the left-wing side of the MKs in the Knesset, you have Deputy Economy Minister. This is probably the worst one. Yair Golan, who's made a terrible name for himself regarding settlers recently. From the Meretz Liberal Party, he said, quote, people with a messianic and dangerous worldview are dragging Israel into the most extreme places. A few weeks ago, he called settlers subhuman. Yeah. And that's, quote, subhuman. He kind of retracted his statement, but then after this attack last Friday, he said, quote, fine, not subhuman. So what would you call them? So this one attack happens, and he says, maybe, I'm justified in calling settlers subhuman. It's just ridiculous.
Luke, which these are the same citizens of the country.
I'm representing to you what the liberal side of Israel's Knesset is saying, right? Foreign Minister Yair Lapid said such attacks move Israel closer to, quote, an abyss that cannot be bridged. And Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz, which leads into this next part, also from the Meretz Party, he took it a step further because he called it, quote, terrifying violence and a, quote, pogrom. And he said condemnation is not enough. The perpetrators must be stopped and prosecuted, and the wild outposts from which the violence came must be evacuated. Which is not an empty threat, because a few days after this attack happened, the residents of Givat Ronen, they woke up to notices on their doors.
Demolition notices.
Demolition.
Well, not for the whole entire community, but for many of the homes there's demolition orders. As a response to, and I want to say too, Luke, a little bit of a clarification is not all of the attackers came from there. There was a little dispersed from other places as well. So the people of that village are also, they're paying a price. And some of the homes are not even connected to the people who did the atrocious attack. Okay, so, if you want to equate it to terrorism, if a terrorist commits an attack, well, they destroy his house or at least a room of his house or something like that. And that's a non-citizen, again, most of the time.
Which, again, it shouldn't be equated because you're talking about terrorism and bombings and murders as opposed to crime, because that's what it is.
With a citizen, that there's laws that you do. There's no law that says you go to a citizen's house and destroy it because he hurt somebody. He hit somebody over the head with a stick and really hurt him. Okay, that's crime and it needs to be dealt with. But there's no law that says you should go and tear down his house. War, that's a different situation. If you're in war, you go and you destroy the house. That's a totally different situation that we have happening with the community of Givat Ronen. And I'll tell you the really unfortunate news is that a leftist government that will destroy these homes will not stop there.
Right.
Once they get that machine going, there's lots of homes that can be destroyed that are either on the line of that have not been legalized yet, which this could have tremendous impact in a really bad way for the settlements of Judea and Samaria, because the government itself is, in many cases, as we just read, a few of the leftists are buying into the idea that this represents the entire 700,000 living in Judea and Samaria.
Right.
That's
Josh,
not
obviously, bottom line for us is that we condemn Jewish violence against Arab Palestinians and anyone else, and we condemn Palestinian terrorism and violence against Jews. Just to show you that there's more than likely a little bit more to the story as well, we should talk about one of the members of Rabbis for Human Rights that you know personally, because quite a few years ago now, he and his group showed up in somewhere that we were working.
I'm the director of operations for volunteer operations, so I'm out there all the time in the field. We're working with volunteers. So one of our fields, we're out and we're harvesting olives this one day with a big group of volunteers. Well, this guy,
to put in perspective, that harvesting olives for a Jewish farmer with a well-established farm. It wasn't just like some random plot of trees.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like a big Jewish farm.
Right. And so this guy comes up, and what does he do? He's really a instigator. He wants to go in and he wants to cause trouble. He's an
American Reform rabbi.
Yeah. Which he's just if you really want to get it, there's really bad people in the world that really do awful things. And what does he do? He incites. He tries to get people to harm. And so most of these situations that you see, like even down at the just happened that we just described, well, he incited that incident. That wouldn't have just happened on its
Because
own.
like we said, the Arabs are not interested in planting trees when they just burned almost 3,000 of our trees a few months ago.
Well, he wanted to make a news headline with him with a bloody face. Where do you go to do that? You go to a radical community where you could expect to get some pushback. It's still not good, but he knew where to go to get it. And he went there to make a point to the international world and try to get sympathy because of the news right now.
Well, because in the incident where he showed up and was yelling and screaming at you, like he had brought Arabs with him,
grabbed Arabs
and he
with
was
him.
having a hard time getting them to like.
Well, no, Luke, it was even funnier than that because he told the Arabs, he said, hey, this is your olive grove. Well, guys, it just absolutely wasn't it. I mean, there was never an Arab claim on this land. The Jews planted the olives. We were picking the Jewish olives like Jewish. So he was trying to incite something, telling the Arabs, no, this is your olive grove. You know it's your olive grove. And the Arab response was hysterical because the Arabs told him, they said, no, that's not our olive grove. It's actually
so he was
Jewish
having a hard time
olive
getting
grove.
them going in that particular
Which thankfully,
instance.
thank God that day he was unable to incite an incident. And that's the only reason why. But even in that, Luke, it was terrible. You know why? He was able, he was able, actually. And he did it through the court system. Because he was able to get a few Arabs to join him on the side of the road, attacking our olive picking of a Jewish orchard, the military came in and thought, oh, there's beginning to be a little bit of strife here. You know what? They banned the harvest of that olive grove. So that entire Jewish olive grove was then therefore canceled. We couldn't go back in and harvest it because Eric Asherman, this leftist guy, made up. There was no Arab conflict. The neighbors weren't at war with the Jews. It was a leftist guy that came in and created a scene, and then the military said, okay, now you're not able to pick the olives. So that's literally what happens on multiple times. These instigators go in and they create an incident that really disturbs the peace.
Right.
So everybody should know that this is what happens in many cases. These instigators are really doing a terrible thing.
Okay, guys, ready for the side-by-side comparison? We're just going to go through when Arab violence and terrorism happens, this is the response. When Jewish violence happens, this is the response. You guys ready for it? Well, first of all, just to put the backdrop, we've said this many, many times. I would say at least 50-1, okay? Arab violence versus Jewish violence. So it's not happening like the UN is saying it's happening whatsoever at all. Arab violence is many, many times directed against human life. Jewish violence, when it happens, the few times that it does, is very, most of the time, not directed against human life.
Luke, and I mention one thing before you get into this, and everybody's got to listen up to this because this is just uncanny. But when you look at leftist records, do you know that they consider violence, Israeli violence, is when a soldier takes out a terrorist?
Right.
Did you realize that?
Or like the conflict on the Gaza border.
Do you know
have thousands of Gazans and Palestinians that are protesting and coming against Israel, and the army responds? That's counted, right?
Yeah, because the nation of Israel and the military of Israel, the protectors of Israel and the citizens of Israel are all in one box.
Settlers.
Doesn't matter. Settlers all in one box. And guess what? Even when they send a rocket in and take out a Hamas hub in Gaza, that's considered Israeli aggression and violence against the Arabs. So when you see the figures, Luke, you're saying 51, that's very generous. That's including when the military goes in and is at war with Hamas and takes out a terrorist. Israelis don't take out they take out terrorists. Terrorists, on the other hand, take out civilians. So we want to make that clear, Luke. Let's get into this.
Arab violence happens. What is the response? The perpetrators are lauded in the streets.
Yep.
In Gaza, if a terrorist attack happens, especially when someone is killed, when a Jew is killed, candy's passed out, and there's celebration in the streets. They're praised and honored by their own government and leadership. If they're killed, their family begins receiving a very good salary from the Palestinian Authority. If they go to prison, they get a salary, and their family gets taken from the PA. They and their family get lifetime benefits. If they get out of prison eventually, then they're guaranteed a good government job with the PA. And if you have a particularly horrific attack, then you get a soccer stadium named after you. You get streets or squares named after you. You get schools named after you. The schools put up posters of your picture. Or you go down to Nablus like we did, and you can go watch our video, and your picture is on every street corner because you're a martyr, a shaheed.
And the more you kill, the more honored you'll be.
Correct. That's why you get in Ramallah, you get the soccer stadium that's named after you.
Right.
If you happen to have a really bad bus bomb where you killed 30 people, that's when you get the stadium named after you.
Luke, what about on the Jewish side? What happens?
Jewish violence happens. Okay, very minimally. But if we are going to do the comparison, Jewish violence happens. The instigators are punished to the furthest extent of the law. The attacks are condemned by the Israeli government. They're condemned by most of the settlements and settlement leaders. And they're condemned by the head rabbi of Har Bracha, he condemns stuff like this.
Yeah. I mean, the closest municipality to the situation we just spoke about totally condemned it. Totally condemned it. The situation we just spoke about.
So the rabbis condemn it. And even people from their own communities condemn these acts of violence. Yeah. I was reading even a little bit more of a liberal article in Israeli news, and they said that Givat Ronen is one of 5 of the what they would consider radical settlements where you see more violence come out of. And I would say even in that community, because I've met people from there before,
I have friends
their
there.
own people
They're not violent.
Condemn these attacks, right? And they're part of very small groups. And I would say there might be 5 out of I forget the exact number, but several hundred communities in Judea and Samaria. There might be 5 small communities with a small fringe group within that community that commit any kind of acts
and look,
of violence.
did you know for a fact these communities that have this kind of reputation are being watched by Israel's top level Shin Bet and all these guys? They're watching them to make sure, and if they ever do anything, guess where they end up, Luke?
In jail.
In jail. Okay, case
Josh,
closed.
in the meantime,
totally
while the whole
situation.
world is talking about an act of settler violence, why don't you tell us what actually happened? What else happened
No,
in
just yesterday.
Israel's heartland?
Just yesterday. So, Luke, all the news is coming out about this. Blah, 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 blah. Whatever. You know what happened on the Arab side the same day that they just refused to cover? Well, there was a drive-by shooting literally 2 minutes from where this incident happened. Just another, just around the corner.
An actual shooting.
An Arab drove by with a gun and pop, shot at the military post right there to try to shoot soldiers. Thank God he wasn't successful. Down in the Jordan Valley, 50 weapons were discovered. We're talking about machine guns, pistols, serious weapons.
Smuggling operation.
Smuggling operations that took all these. And then there was a car bombing where a car blew up. Thank God nobody again was injured.
South of Tel Aviv.
In south of Tel Aviv. All these things, Luke, happened yesterday. And we're talking about, again, I'm not making light of it, but we're talking about people that had sticks and stones versus, that's going to be the headlines because it's Jewish. And I'm not saying it's horrible that it happened. And these men will go to jail. They will.
Yeah.
On the other side, the world is refusing to and these were the few things that I just saw. I didn't even spend a lot of time looking up. These were the headlines on the Israeli news, our local news, that drive-by shooting, 50 weapons discovered on a smuggle mission, and car bombing. What? We're talking about bombs and guns and shooting versus the sticks and stones. Really, if you want to compare it, there you go. This is literally what's happening.
To show you that there is no comparison.
No.
Okay, whatsoever. Guys, in conclusion, and we want to hear your thoughts, so get that conversation going down in the comments below because we do want to hear what you think about this issue and what are you hearing in your local or international news. Conclusion, we condemn violence on both sides, no matter what happens and who it's directed against. It's important to realize settler violence is not real, okay?
Not.
It's called crime and violence, and it's dealt with to the furthest extent of the law. The few incidents of violence committed by Jews in Judea and Samaria is simply crime. And like we said, it's dealt with. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss all of the content that we have coming out. Check all the rest of what we put out on the Israel Guys app. Download on your favorite app store or go to theisraelguys.com. Tune out the fake news and tune into what is actually happening here in the heartland of Israel. We'll be back next week here at the Israel Guys. Hi guys, thanks so much for watching. 2 quick things before you go. 1, smash that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell so you don't miss out on any more of our content. Secondly, if you want to help us produce more stories and authentic truth straight from Israel's heartland, you can do so at patreon.com/theisraelguys or at our very own website. It's theisraelguys.com. Both links are in the description below.